Hello, my name is Flor Sandoval, and I'm the Program Director at Sonora Environmental Research Institute. Today, we're going to talk about disabilities and fair housing. SERI is a local nonprofit organization located in Tucson, Arizona. We were founded in 1994, and we work with low-income communities and minorities in the Southwest to protect the environment and improve community health. We are committed to make our community a better place for everybody to live in, work, and engage. We currently have an education and outreach initiative program funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. What is the Fair Housing Act? In 1968, the Fair Housing Act, or FHA, was signed, making it illegal for people to discriminate in any aspect of housing based on an individual's race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familiar status, disability. The FHA defined these as their 7 federally protected classes. You can also find more information on each one of these 7 protected classes on our Basics of Fair Housing workshop that is also available online. Why is fair housing important? Giving everyone access to housing in every neighborhood ensures that everyone has access to the resources they want and affects the rest of their lives. Housing discrimination affects where someone lives, where someone receives education, where someone is employed, access to goods and services such as food, healthcare, and insurance rates, access to safety, wealth such as home equity, and access to social and professional mobility. So where the Fair Housing Act applies? The Fair Housing Act applies when people are renting, buying a home, getting a mortgage, seeking housing assistance, or engaging in any other housing-related transactions. So now we're going to go into a little more detail on disability and the Fair Housing Act. Who is a person with a disability? Federal non-discrimination law defines a person with a disability to include any individual with physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, an individual with a record of such an impairment, or an individual who's regarded as having such an impairment. Refers to both physical and mental impairments. People who are regarded as disabled or have a record of a disability are also protected under the federal law. What are physical and mental impairments? So here you can see a few, but they're not limited, so it can be much more. I'll give you a minute to go through them. And here we have some photos. FHA and disability. The FHA makes it unlawful to refuse to make reasonable accommodations to rules, policies, practices, or services when such accommodations may be necessary to afford a person with a disability an equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling and public and common use of the areas. Reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations is in a change exception or adjustment to a rule, policy, practice, or service that might be necessary for a person with a disability to have an equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling, including public and common use of spaces, and to fulfill their program obligations. Housing providers, including homeowners and condominium associations, must allow assisted animals even if it's a no pets building. Does not have to be in writing, but it's highly recommended for your records. Assistance animals. An assistant animal that works, provides assistance, or performs tasks for the benefit of a person with a disability or that provides emotional support that alleviates one or more identified effects of a person's disability. And an assistance animal is not a pet, so that's very important to. Reasonable accommodations requests for an assistance animal may include, for example, a request to live with an assistance animal at a property where a housing provider has a no pet policy. A request to waive a pet policy, fee, insurance, or other rules as to an assistant animal. Again, an assistance animal is not a pet. Reasonable accommodations A housing provider may not ask about the nature or severity of the disability, but may request information about the relationship between the person's disability and the need for the requested accommodation. This can be provided by an individual making the request, a doctor or other medical professional, peer group support, a non-medical service agency, or another reliable third party. There has to be a link between the service animal and the person with the disability. How is the pet making or how is the assistance animal making the environment for the person better? And an example will be when I feel anxious, my pet makes me feel more comfortable and makes me feel better. Reasonable accommodations. When considering reasonable accommodations, modifications request, a housing provider may take the following into consideration. Is there an individual for whom the request is made a person with a disability? FHA and disability. The FHA prohibits a housing provider from refusing to permit at the expense of a person with a disability reasonable accommodations of existing premises occupied or to be occupied by such a person if modifications may be necessary to afford such a person's full enjoyment of premises. I'm sorry, this computer keeps wanting to go ahead. Yes, and a structural change to an existing premise, occupied or not occupied by a person with a disability in order to afford such a person full enjoyment of other premises. A reasonable accommodation can include structural changes to interior and exteriors of a dwelling and to a common and public use of areas. Some examples will be installation of a ramp into a building, lowering the entry threshold of a unit, and installation of grab bars in the bathroom. How must comply? The requirement to provide reasonable accommodations and modification applies to, but is not limited to individuals, corporations, associations, and others involved in housing transactions. Property owners, housing managers, homeowners and condominiums associations, lenders and brokerage services, real estate agencies, state and local governments such as zoning or other land use decisions. Did you know that out of the 28,880 complaints that HUD and the state and federal agencies investigate each year, at least 58.9% allegates discrimination because of disability? Accessibility requirements for buildings. Accessibility requirements for multifamily housing, both privately owned and publicly assisted housing, regardless of whether they are rental or for sale units, must meet the accessibility requirements of the FHA when they are located in a building or 4 or more units. Built for first occupancy after March 13, 1991. Anything after March 13, 1991 has to have so many units that are accessible. If more than one floor, the building needs to have an elevator. Accessibility requirements for buildings. Accessibility requirements for federally assisted housing. All federally assisted new construction housing development with 5 or more units must design and construct 5% of the dwelling units or at least one unit, whichever is greater, to be accessible for a person with mobility disabilities. If these buildings are privately owned and funded by HUD, this program started back in the 1960s. HUD wanted to create this funding source to partnership with housing providers with 30-year contracts, but need to give accessibility units to access for minority communities. Section 8 is an example of accessibility, and they have to meet at least 3% of hearing impairment. So now we're gonna go over some examples of reasonable accommodations and modifications. Assigning an accessible parking space for a person with a mobility impairment. Permitting a tenant to transfer to a ground floor unit. adjusting a rent payment schedule to accommodate when an individual receives income assistance, adding a grab bar to the tenant's bathroom, permitting an applicant to submit a housing application via a different means, permitting an assistance animal in a no pets building for a person who's deaf, blind, has seizures, or has mental disability. If you have experienced unlawful discrimination in any housing, you can file a complaint with us. We have 4 different methods that you can contact us. The first one is via online. If you go to this link, seriaz.org/fair housing, so fill it out online and it will be sent directly to us, and we're gonna get a hold of you within 1 business day. You can also email us the form, or you can call us directly at our hotline number that appears right here. You can also fill out a form by paper and send it to us by mail. In all these cases, we're gonna reply to you within 1 business day after getting the complaint. We're also a certified Arizona relay-friendly business. We review and respond to each complaint and collect any necessary intake information. We partnered with Southwest Fair Housing Council, who's one of the partners that we refer the complaints that come through us. They do follow up with you. We're gonna leave the link along with this presentation so you can access the video that we have here from Southwest Fair Housing, and you can go directly to their page to see it. Here are some of the resources that we gathered to make this presentation. And lastly, I wanna thank you for your time. If you have any fair housing complaints, please feel free to call us to our hotline. Thank you and have a wonderful day.